Ever walk into your house and it's just like stuff?
Yeah.
Everywhere you look. I know I'm guilty of that.
It gets away from you.
Yeah. But wouldn't it be amazing to take our spaces, our homes, and make them more than just places to put stuff, right? Like to actually make them reflect what we really care about.
Totally.
And that's actually what we're diving into today, this idea of sacred spaces.
Right.
And like before anyone gets intimidated, you do not have to be like, super religious
Right.
to have a sacred space. You don't have to be chanting or
No incense required.
lighting incense unless you want to.
Exactly. It's all about intentionality. It's less about like, oh, I've got this much square footage, and more about how your space makes you feel when you're in it.
Okay, so like I'm going to paint a picture. It's this morning and I'm looking around my living room.
Huh.
And let's just say that serene sanctuary isn't the first thing that pops into my head, right?
Interesting.
It's more like organized chaos with a little bit of how did that stack of books end up there? So I'm curious. Think about your own living room for a sec. When you walk in, what's the first thing you notice? Right? Is it like, I'm home, this is so peaceful? Or is it, oh, there's that laundry I was supposed to fold?
Yeah, I think what's so interesting about that is our homes, they really do become these reflections of us, internally, whether or not we actually mean for them to be that.
That's so true.
So, for example, like, somebody who's really into minimalism might have a super streamlined, really organized, clutter-free space, and that speaks to that desire for order and simplicity.
Exactly.
Totally.
Yes.
But then, like, you go to somebody else's place and it's full of pictures and things from trips and little souvenirs. That tells a different story, right?
It does. It does. It's all about connection and memories. And, if that person's the one who feels overwhelmed by clutter, maybe it's not just a matter of tidying up. Maybe it's like, what does all this represent? Am I holding on to these things because I actually need them? Or am I like surrounding myself with reminders of like people and places and experiences because that's what I value?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's important, too, to remember that we're not talking about like a perfectly curated Instagram feed here, right?
Of course not, no.
Life is messy, things get literally and figuratively messy, and your home is allowed to reflect that.
Totally. Speaking of things that might sound intimidating
Right.
and maybe a little messy, how on earth do we define this whole sacred space idea?
Yeah.
Because honestly, when I hear it, it sounds kind of serious. Like, do I need like incense? Do I need like a Gregorian chant playlist?
You make a really good point, because the language can get a little loaded. But what it really comes down to is intentionality. It's about saying this space, even if it's tiny, this space is for something that's important to me. It's about, not just like throwing things on a shelf, but being really intentional.
So like, it doesn't matter how small it is. It could be a meditation nook.
Exactly.
Or for me, honestly, right now, it's like that corner of my desk where if mail lands there, it's like not allowed.
Claim it.
That is my sanctuary for my to-do list.
I love that.
That counts, right?
Absolutely. It could be your reading chair bathed in sunlight, or like your creative corner where you've got all your supplies out, paints and pencils and everything. Or it could even just be that window where you have your coffee in the morning. It's about creating this little haven that resonates with you.
Yeah.
Get to connect with yourself and what's important to you. And I think that actually loops back to what we were talking about before, right? This idea of your home as a reflection. If what you're craving is more peace in your life, maybe creating a peaceful space in your house is like the first step to actually inviting that in.
I love that. So it's less about like following these strict design rules and all about just being intentional and saying, what do I need in my life? And then actually making space for it, which is powerful. But like, where do you even begin?
Yeah. I think it starts with identifying your values, like what actually brings you peace, what brings you joy, what makes you feel, focused and grounded. And then once you have like a better sense of what those things are, then you can start to think about like, okay, so how can I reflect that in my environment? So let's say, for example, you're somebody who really thrives, being out in nature. Yeah. Maybe your sacred space involves like bringing in more plants or opening the windows more, letting fresh air in, or even just like, incorporating more natural textures and colors.
Yeah. Yeah. So going back to that home as a mirror idea, if you look around, you're like, that doesn't really match up with like the inner peace and joy I'm craving.
Right.
Then it might be time to rearrange a few things,
Exactly.
both physically and mentally.
Totally. And you don't have to go crazy. Like, like you don't have to do a full-on renovation. Start small. Like, just find a corner, a shelf, even just like the surface of a table. You can dedicate that. Say, this is my little haven. Maybe it's as simple as just clearing the clutter off a coffee table, putting a vase of fresh flowers on it.
I love that. Start
Yeah.
small. That's doable,
Yeah.
right? But I mean, how do you take it from like, here's an empty shelf to actually making it feel special, like something that you're drawn to, you want to spend time with, you want to be around?
Yeah. I think that's where you bring in the sensory details, right?
Right, yeah.
Like, what do you want to see? What do you want to smell? What do you want to hear in that space? So instead of like the overhead light, maybe it's a lamp.
Oh, yeah.
Instead of like, the sounds of traffic, maybe it's, a calming like nature soundscape.
Uh-huh.
Or even just like, a favorite scented candle. Those little things can make a huge difference.
That's so true. I've got this one corner, it's got a comfy chair, and it gets the best afternoon light.
Oh, perfect.
And just adding like a candle completely changed it. I went from like never really noticing this corner to it's my go-to reading spot now.
It works. I love that. And I think the fascinating thing is once you start to open up to that, paying attention to the senses and what feels good,
Yeah.
you start to see these little opportunities everywhere. You notice that corner you could do something with, or that window that would be perfect for a couple of plants. It's like your whole house just starts to feel like, oh, the possibilities.
It's like unlocking a whole other level.
Yes.
But in your house.
Yes. I love that.
So tell me, listeners, what spot are you going to reclaim in your own homes? What senses are you going to awaken in that space? Something to think about until our next deep dive.